remember when you were a child being asked the following question? What do you want to be when you grow up? Who remembers being asked that? Some of you are like, that was so long ago I can't remember. I remember when I was asked that, and it used to, get me thinking. I think when I was a kid, I wanted to be a fireman. Then I wanted to be a soldier. Guess what I never wanted to be? That's right, a priest. When I was in high school, I wanted to be a doctor, but then it was getting a little uncomfortable because I was going to have to make decisions soon. I mean, this question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was starting to grow up. And I began to feel the pressure. I've got to choose a university. I've got to choose what I'm going to study. And this could define me for life. This could really shape my life. And there was quite a lot of pressure. And maybe there's some teenagers here with us today who are like, yeah, I get that. I'm starting to feel that pressure. In the gospel today, we hear of an interaction between Jesus and one of the religious leaders of the time. Jesus is having a bit of a debate with a bunch of people, and this guy jumps in and he asks a question which was kind of like a common question, for those who like to talk about theological issues. Of all the commandments, and there were lots of commandments, which is the most important one? And he asked this of Jesus, and Jesus gives an answer that is no surprise, but also contains in it a bit of innovation. So what is not surprising is the first thing Jesus says. He quotes from the book of Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's like, yep, that was predictable because that was a very important passage for the Jewish people. We're going to talk about that more in a minute. But then he immediately answers, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He says, in these two are the most important commandments. He combines these two commandments into one. That is the innovation. Jesus teaches us that you cannot separate love of God from love of neighbor. They are inseparable. But Jesus bases his argument on the presumption of the first thing he says, that passage from Deuteronomy, which was our first reading today. He presumes that those who are listening are going to accept that without question. Today, however, I would say that is certainly something we cannot take for granted. Now, let's take a moment to look at this more closely. This passage of Scripture is called the Shema. Everyone say Shema. Shema. See, now you speak Hebrew. That's really impressive. The word Shema means listen. Listen up. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. This prayer was the passage of Scripture that most defined the Jewish people. It was prayed by faithful Jews at least twice a day. And to this day, the custom is when you pray this passage, you cover your eyes with your hands in order to help you concentrate, in order to help you focus, so that you can pray this prayer with intensity and with intentionality. And the whole passage is as follows. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. And that's where the first reading today ended. But wait, there's more. It continues. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. Meaning, like, talk about them all the time. Bind them as a sign on your hand, fix them as an emblem on your forehead, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. If you've ever seen an Orthodox Jew wearing the little plastic thingy on the forehead, it's like, what is that? In that little box is a piece of paper with the Shema written on it. If you've seen an Orthodox Jew, they'll put bindings on their wrists, on their hand. That's a reminder of the Shema. If you've ever been to a Jewish home, you'll see often a small metal plaque on the doorpost. Guess what that is? Come on, you know the answer. The Shema. It was like a Jewish creed, but more than a creed. These were words that defined the Jewish people. In this passage, they are defined by God, community, and family. And until recent decades, well, the same thing could have been said about us Christians, us Catholics. That our self-understanding was primarily one that was defined by our belief in God, by our identity in a community and our family. God, in the passage today, declares himself to be our God. He is your God. See, this passage says that we are God's people and the Lord is our God. We live out this mutual belonging by being faithful to God's commandments, not as some burden, but keeping them with our hearts. Community. This passage reveals that God relates to his people as a collective, not as a bunch of individuals. We are defined by our community, by the collective. We are not in isolation. I mean, certainly we have individuality for sure, but we are defined primarily by the community. Family, we are shaped by the faith of our ancestors, every single one of us. The story that we're part of began long before we did and will continue long after we're gone. We are links in a chain, not single episode sagas. However, in recent decades, these realities that once defined us, that were perceived to direct us towards a full and meaningful life, are now seen as obstacles to human fulfillment. The heroic thing to do is to not just refuse to be defined by God, community, and family, but to reject them altogether. A rejection of God leads us to reject our identity as creatures. We're not created, we create ourselves. We decide what is good and evil. We reject received wisdom and morality along with all of its burdensome commandments. And as for community, well, there's no real responsibility towards the collective. We're not bound by the community. There is only the individual with rights and freedoms who is free to identify with any community he or she chooses. And as for family, well, everyone knows that your family will oppress you if you don't set limits that will protect and preserve your autonomy and isolation. Fulfillment is found, see, here's the thing. In all of these things, fulfillment is found in the rejection of all defining narratives that do not originate in personal choice. I'm going to say that again. Fulfillment, according to our world, is found in the rejection of all defining narratives that do not originate in personal choice. We define ourselves. We create ourselves. I mean, we're not even defined by biology. A few weeks ago, I voted online for the municipal election, and it was really easy to do. It was great. Then afterwards, a poll popped up saying, "Would you like to give us your feedback on your experience of online voting?" I thought, well, why not? It was such a positive experience. And I went on it, answered a few questions. Then it said to me, what gender do you identify with? I was like, anyway, I was forced to choose one of them. And then the next question, what gender were you assigned at birth? So I called my mother and asked her. I mean, it's crazy. It's like this used to be fringe. Now it's become mainstream. Everything is arbitrary unless it's confirmed by my own free choice. Last week I found something online it was 5 things that Jesus did not say. It's really good. And it reveals to us how this popular wisdom kind of oozes into our life, seeps into our imagination. And it especially reveals how it is opposed to the teaching of Jesus. But here's the thing, it sounds really good. It's really seductive. I mean, just close your eyes for a second and listen to these words. Follow your heart. Be true to yourself. Believe in yourself. Live your truth as long as you're happy. It sounds like the script of 90% of movies I've watched in the last 10 years. I mean, it sounds really good, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Like it does. It kind of sounds, that's really nice. That makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. But it's not Christianity. And I don't think it's helpful for any human being. I mean, follow your heart, the world says. Well, Jesus says, follow me. That's a big difference. Just saying, right? Big difference. You get it? I hope you get that difference. Follow your heart, follow me. Be true to yourself, the world says. Well, Jesus said, whoever wants to be my disciples must deny themselves. Believe in yourself. Well, Jesus said, believe in me. Live your truth. Jesus said, I am the truth. And the world tells us, well, as long as you're happy. And Jesus said, well, what will it profit a man if he gains the world but loses his soul? This worldly wisdom is seductive, and many have surrendered to it with devastating results. Remember the question I started with? What do you want to be when you grow up? Now, you remember being asked that question, right? At some point. Or at least thinking about it. Do you remember the pressure you felt, especially as you got into high school? Do you remember the anxiety around, what if I make the wrong choice? What if I don't get it right? You remember? Well, today, young people not only have to choose their careers, they have to create their own belief systems. They have to choose their community, their sexual orientation, their sexual partners, and even their genders. And there are between 60 and 240 of those, depending on who you talk to. And of course, it's all fluid. Even if you do choose these things, a month later it's all different. Many of you are aware today of the unprecedented levels of depression among young people. This is a news article put out by Gallup, who's one of the leading research organizations in the U.S. They found that among young people, the depression levels among young people has increased 35% in the last 7 years. Now, the reasons for this are complex, but it's got to have something to do with this. 35% increase in depression levels among young people, according to Gallup. Pew Research discovered much of the same numbers. They came to similar conclusions and also pointed out that young women today are 3 times more likely than young men to face depression. In the face of all of this, we as people of faith need to remember the words of Jesus who said, I came that they may have life and have it to the full. It's John 10:10. It's a great passage. It's an easy one to remember, easy reference, right? John 10:10. Everyone say John 10:10. Say, now you know John 10:10. I came that they may have life and have it to the full. You see, God, as always, wants us to hear His voice, to hear with our ears and with our hearts that He is ours and we are His, that we are not isolated and alone. We are not abandoned to the tyranny of our wants and our whims, that we are part of a big family and part of a big story. in which we're called to play a meaningful role, but it's not our biography. It's the story, the ancient story of salvation that continues down to this present day. So, brothers and sisters, be alert. This seductive mindset, this way of thinking, this ideology, it's all around us. You know this. It's in our schools, our workplaces, it's in sports organizations, it's in the movies and TV shows, it's in Netflix, Apple, Disney, and Amazon, all the commercials and online and in print. And at times, it's conspicuous and aggressive. At other times, it's disguised and gentle. But it's always appealing to us. Now, we can't live in a bubble. We're in this world. We can't avoid this. But let's have eyes to see that we are constantly being told a story about ourselves that bears little resemblance to what God says about us. I started with a story of when I was a child and the question, what do I want to be when I grow up? You know, I now realize that even back then, and that's gone back to the 70s, it's ancient history, it was the wrong question. I realize now that the seeds of this philosophy had already been sown. You see, a believer doesn't ask, what do I want to be when I grow up? What does a believer ask? What does God want me to be? Let's keep our eyes on Jesus and remember his words, I came that they may have life and have it to the full. And we will experience this life when we seek to love the Lord with all of our hearts, all of our souls, our minds and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves.